Alright, in this video we're going to have a look at a practical example. Thanks to Christopher Page for lending me his work in progress animation. This animation has a problem. If you look at the elbow, you can see how it intersects the table as he moves his torso around and moves his hand around. And it's a tricky thing to animate, right? Because you want to be able to move your torso and you want to be able to move your arm, but you don't want to have to keep paying attention to where the elbow is all the time. If we look at the controllers, you can see that the elbow is currently controlled by the pole vector, so the whole arm is an IK arm, which you would expect because you want him to keep his hand on the table, grabbing this glass. And it can be very difficult to move the torso without also moving the position of the elbow. So let's see if we can use Ragdoll to simplify or even perhaps fix this problem. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to simulate the arm, and I'd like to record only the pole vector. I want the pole vector to be the only thing that I apply animation or apply simulation onto. I want to leave everything else the way it is. And for that, we're going to need the arm to be dynamic, and also we need the table to be part of the simulation so that it can collide against the table. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to show the joints right here, because I'd like to track the joints but record onto the pole vector. I'm going to start with the clavicle and work my way out. We'll get the markers panel here, assign a group. There we go. And right off the bat, we can see that the markers are doing a pretty decent job following the input animation. But you'll notice that if I just reset the time to somewhere around, because we don't really want to track all of it, maybe we'll track from here. We'll start around the problem area, and you can see that the markers they're somewhat sluggish, somewhat lagging behind the arm, and we're not really interested in that. We only really want the elbow to be the thing that moves. We want to keep the hand exactly where the hand is from animation. So for that, I'm going to make the hand into a kinematic hand, and so now we have the clavicle, which is the root of our group. It's kinematic per default. So the clavicle is now entirely following animation, the hand is entirely following animation, and the only thing that really moves is the elbow, and that's what we want. But it's still going through the table because we still haven't assigned a marker to the table, so I'm going to do that now. There we go. And by default, the table would fall to the ground, so I'm going to make that kinematic. And there we go. So now we can see that the hand is already, we're getting some interaction with the table now, but you'll notice that it still goes through the table. And the reason that happens is because we've asked the hand to follow animation exactly. But the hand is actually forcing the simulation down into the table. So now there's a conflict between the animation wanting it to go through, but the solver trying to push it out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disable contacts with the lower arm altogether, because I really only want contacts with the elbow, and I'm going to mostly ignore the lower arms. So I'm going to make that short and mostly insignificant because we don't really care what it looks like. And then I'm only going to look at the tip of this upper arm capsule. Let's see if I go here and make that a little bit longer, and I'll move it in slightly as well. Something like that. So now I expect the hand to be exactly where animation is. I want the lower arm to not matter, and I only want contacts between the table and the elbow area. So let's see what that looks like. All right, and we're getting somewhere, but it's still going through, well, quite significantly. And that's because, and actually you also notice that it rotates, like it rolls on the table as he rubs against it. And that's not what we want. So I'm going to avoid that by just removing any friction between the elbow and the table. So I'll select both of them, and I'll go friction and also bounciness. Like we can ignore both of these. We only want it to slide along the table. So let's see what that looks like. All right, that looks pretty good. Actually, let's go to a separate view so we can see the difference here. The input animation is going way through the table, and our markers are now sliding on the table. So the next thing I want to do is I want to transfer this sliding elbow back onto our pole vector. So let's go back to the camera view. So I'm going to select our lower arm, and I'm going to transfer the simulation from the lower arm to the pole vector. So I'm going to go Edit, Retarget. So now the pole vector will be getting the motion coming from this elbow. And because all of the other markers that we assigned was joints, and per default the record option will have a ignore joints option, because normally you don't really want to record to joints. So because this is the only control that we've retargeted, if I just hit record, then we'll be all done. On the other hand, what we could do instead is we could put the animation onto a layer, so that we have the collision information on a layer that's separate, so we can toggle it on and off and keep our original pole vector animation safeguarded for when we make changes to the torso, for example, or move the hand. We can just disable the previous simulation and rerun it onto a new layer. So let's try that. So for starters, I'm going to put these channels on a layer. This is going to be the elbow collide layer. And with the layer selected, I'm just going to hit record and let it do its thing. And there we go. So now we have our elbow recorded. And if I hide the solver, hide the controls, hide everything, we can now see the results. And because we have it on a layer, we can now compare the before and after. So you can see how it went through the table a lot before, but now it's not going through the table.